Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christian Roberts, and I'm very humbled and honored to speak before you this morning. I'd like to give honor to God, who is the head of my life, to Dean Carter for that wonderful introduction, for being a great mentor, and to all of you for getting up early to support me. In an article posted to the Odyssey.com in 2016, writer Catherine Moss makes the claim that life is like a movie. Throughout her article, she draws parallels between the phases of life and the phases that take place within a film. And as I read her article, I learned that it certainly can be said that there are some similarities between movies and the lives that we live. Both movies and our lives have a beginning. They have other people who come in and play a role in making the movie of our life what it is. And of course, like movies, our lives have its conclusion. This morning, however, I don't want to focus on the beginning or the conclusion, but on a part of every movie that is central to the plot. What I want to talk about this morning is known as the all is lost moment in a film. Now, the all is lost moment in the movie is when our central character or characters are as far away from his, her, or their desired goal or destination. It's the point in the movie in which things seem at their worst, where the plot is thickened. We don't know how things are going to turn out. If you take a moment to sit back and think, you may be able to identify the all is lost moment from your favorite movie. In The Lion King, the all is lost moment comes when Scar pushes his own brother Mufasa off a cliff and into the stampede. After the stampede is over, Simba finds his father's lifeless body on the ground, and his heart fills with agony, his eyes with tears, as he loses who he loved and looked up to the most. And Remember the Titans, the all is lost moment comes when star linebacker and team captain Gary Bertier gets into a car accident that's so severe that he can never play the game of football again. In Toy Story 3, my personal favorite, the all is lost moment comes when Lotso, the teddy bear, betrays the toys and leaves them abandoned, slipping into a dumpster with no way out and no one to help them. Now, you may not have been able to identify the all is lost moment from your favorite movie, but that's okay. I'm sure we can all identify an all is lost moment from our own lives. Maybe you're like Simba. Maybe you just celebrated your first Christmas or holiday season since someone you loved passed away. Maybe you're wandering through life trying to figure out how you're going to move on after that parent or that grandparent or that mentor or that friend passed away. Maybe you're like Gary. Maybe a health problem has found you unexpectedly. And the doctor told you that even though you feel fine, a medical situation now exists that's going to affect the rest of your life. Maybe you can relate to Gary because just like he lost football, someone or something that meant everything to you is now gone. For you, this all is lost moment is happening as I preach this sermon, as you try to move on after that 1.5 year long relationship ended, after that marriage ended, after the job that you gave your all for told you that your services are no longer needed. Maybe you can relate to Buzz, Woody, and the rest of the toys. Maybe after you were there for people time and time again in your life, they've turned their back on you. They've left you slipping and sliding into your own dumpster. A dumpster of insecurity, the dumpster of loneliness, the dumpster of sitting up at night wondering if you're really worth more than how you were treated. And as I stand before you all this morning, I can recall my all is lost moment. I'm brought back to a Sunday morning on May 24th, 2015, as I sat on my trampoline 2 days after I graduated high school. And I got a phone call, and I picked up the phone, and I was told that my best friend Sinclair, someone who I gotten close to for 2 years, went to church with week after week, someone who I loved and respected, had committed suicide. And I sat there on the line in shock and in horror as I learned what it was like to have your world turned upside down. I can say this morning that if Catherine Moss is right, that if life really is like a movie, we've all had our all is lost moment. And if it hasn't happened yet, it's right around the corner. One person in the Bible whose life is so movie-worthy that it actually has been made into multiple films is, of course, David. Now, David's journey begins in 1 Samuel 16 when he's anointed to be the next king of Israel by Samuel the prophet. His journey hits a high point when he conquers Goliath in chapter 18, in a story you might have heard of, I don't know. However, David, true to form, has a point in his story when he has to endure hard times. It begins in 1 Samuel chapter 20, when he has to flee from Israel out of fear from King Saul. And for 10 chapters, all the way up until chapter 30, we see David struggle. Over those 10 chapters, David is separated from his wife Michal and his best friend Jonathan. Over those 10 chapters, David is running and hiding wherever he can to avoid being captured by Saul. Over those 10 chapters, David learns that Abimelech the priest, someone he loved and admired, was killed in the crossfires of Saul trying to find him. These 10 chapters of David's life show us that even a man as great as David will have a point in life where we face a Goliath that we don't have the stones to conquer. Coincidentally, David in his writings in Psalm 116 addresses this very dilemma. The Bible reads, "The sorrows of death compassed me, and the pains of hell gat hold upon me. I found trouble and sorrow." Now, David begins by describing the sorrow, the pain, and the hopelessness that comes when it feels like our world is crashing down around us. David speaks of the sorrows of death compassing him, meaning that trouble was literally all around him. I'm sure we can all relate to how David's feeling in the text. I mean, to put it simply, David feels trapped by his circumstances. And then David says that he found trouble and sorrow. And maybe that's all it felt like you found in 2017. When you tried to find where God wanted you to be, when you tried to love your neighbor, you found misery, you found disappointment, you found trouble. And in the midst of it all, the one thing you couldn't seem to find was God. Now, David continues on in verse 4. He says, "Then I called upon the name of the Lord. O Lord, I beseech thee, deliver my soul." The verse begins with David crying out to the Lord, and the word beseech in the Bible means that he's literally begging God to intervene. And I wonder, in the midst of all this begging, if God ever wondered if David wondered if God was even listening, if the Lord that we worship is even present in times of trouble. But then David speaks of this one thing that God brings into our lives. This one thing that comes to bring us out of despair to greater aspirations. This one thing that takes us from our all is lost moment to our happy ending. From heartbreak to hallelujah. From broken to blessed. From our breakdown to our breakthrough. What David talks about is the deliverance of God. What took me from being a 17-year-old boy, not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, not wanting to try new challenges because I thought that all that would come out of it was heartbreak, to standing before you at the Academy of Preachers is the deliverance of God. What make you go from feeling unloved, worthless after that breakup, after that unemployment, after you saw your transcript from last semester, to knowing that you are fearfully and wonderfully made is the deliverance of God. What will make you go from looking back at your past, at all that didn't work out for you, at all the friendships and relationships that failed, to looking forward because you know that before you were formed, there was someone who knew you, is the deliverance of God. Now, I know someone may be wondering what exactly the deliverance of God is. Well, the deliverance of God comes when God steps in when our life is in shambles, when we're in bondage to negative self-image because we look at ourselves how others see us and not how God sees us. When we are so caught up in our past that we can't look to our future, God steps in by empowering us in the midst of our insecurities, fears, and struggles. But you know what? Maybe I'm explaining this all wrong this morning. Maybe the best illustration of the deliverance of God came in Toy Story 3. You know, in the gospel according to Toy Story 3, when the toys were slipping and sliding into that dumpster I was telling you about, they're not even looking for a way out of the situation because they think that there's nothing more for them than the trash can that's in front of them. But in the midst of it all, God dropped down a claw from above to pick the toys up out of their circumstances. In the midst of everything that you're facing, God will drop the claw of deliverance to pick you back up. And as I look back over my life at all the trash I've been stuck in, I know the only reason I saw the other side is because God dropped the claw. When my best friend committed suicide and I couldn't deal with it, I was staying up at night with guilt and hopelessness and worried. But then God dropped the claw. I remember when I was in high school and I couldn't make friends, I was doing poorly in my classes. I was told that I would never go to a four-year college. But then God dropped the claw. I remember when Donald Trump was elected president and I didn't know how I would tell my brother and sister how such a person would end up in office. But then God dropped the claw. I remember sitting up at night wondering why my own dad wouldn't call me for years. But then God dropped the claw. I remember when my mentor, who I thought I could trust, tried to make a sexual attempt at me. But then God dropped the claw. And I don't know what you're facing this morning, but I know when God drops the claw, everything that troubled us in the past becomes obsolete. No sins can put you out of the reach of God's claw. Nothing can drop you down too low for God's claw to pick you back up again. And as I close, I want to let you know that we have a God that can catch us when we're falling. They can repair the damage that has been done in our lives. I just came to encourage you to walk before the Lord. Wherever you are in the movie of life, I just want to tell you remember who the director is. And 2,000 years ago, your director shot a movie. He casted a Virgin Mary to give birth to the protagonist. And for 2,000 years, this protagonist, Jesus Christ, won souls, performed miracles. And just like you and me, Jesus had his all is lost moment. He was denied by Peter, betrayed by Judas. He was taken up a hill on Calvary with a thorn in his side and nails hammered into his hands. And he hung there on the cross while they mocked and ridiculed him. He hung there on the cross while the people he loved wanted him to come down, but he couldn't. And he died. But that wasn't the last scene. All was not lost, because early one Sunday morning, God dropped down the claw of deliverance to pick Jesus up out of the grave. And the same spirit that rose Jesus out of the grave will pick you back up. No matter how many chapters you've been struggling through, no matter what cliffs you've been pushed off of, no matter what has encountered you in your life, we have no need to fear, because our God is the deliverer. Thank you.